On behalf of the Bursa Bazaar Foundation and the Rihla Initiative for Green Economic Growth, I'm very pleased to welcome you here to our panel in Bangkok, the fourth in our regional series. We're very grateful to the Rockefeller Foundation for generously providing us this venue to gather here today with distinguished colleagues and participants from across South and Southeast Asia. And I also thank you all for joining us online as well. This is a particularly exciting moment in our journey as the Rihla Initiative is now in its sixth month in its first phase, and which focuses on policy design. And we have been fortunate to build an inspiring community of thinkers and practitioners working across climate finance and economic development. Our initiative is centered on a simple but urgent premise that Gulf climate finance, which is already mobilized at scale, must now be shaped to deliver long-term development impact in the regions where it flows. To do this, we are seeking to establish policy frameworks that ensure these investments support not only a green transition, but also a just transition as well. Across South and Southeast Asia, we see these challenges and opportunities clearly. This region is home to some of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world, but also some of the most dynamic economies. It also plays a vital role in Gulf foreign investment strategies, trade, energy, and diaspora ties. But there is still work to be done to match regional needs and priorities with Gulf capital. South and Southeast Asia are not passive recipients of climate financing. The region is defining its own pathways, forging regional mechanisms, and shaping a new generation of green infrastructure and industrial strategies. Our role is to support, learn from, and align with these efforts. Today's panel is a key part of this effort. It brings together some of Rihla's Policy Council and Gulf Committee members, as well as the Rihla team, including Dao Nguyen, who is the principal author of the recent policy brief that we published this week, and who coordinated today's panel. Thank you very much, Dao. With this panel taking place during the inaugural Bangkok Climate Action Week, we want to test our findings and hear directly from those shaping climate development agendas across the region. I want to also briefly explain the broader structure of the initiative. Rihla includes a policy council of 50 experts from across the Gulf and four regions of which is our focus in the Global South. So Middle East and North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia and the Caucasus, as well as South and Southeast Asia. There's also an implementation council of finance, infrastructure, and development practitioners. We also created 6 sector-specific or thematic focus groups exploring topics such as green industrialization, sustainable agriculture, the blue economy, as well as competition and cooperation with China. We launched the Rihla Handbook in early September and have since released 4 policy briefs covering the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, and now South and Southeast Asia. All are available on our website. We began our panel series 2 weeks ago in the UAE, followed by Morocco and South Africa. And now we're here in Thailand. Next week, we will convene our final regional panel in Kazakhstan, focused on Central Asia and the Caucasus. Please register online. All of these dialogues and publications are feeding into the Rihla Policy Forum, which will take place in November in Doha. There, we will bring together council members, Gulf stakeholders, and institutional partners to refine our recommendations and prepare for the next phase, the implementation phase, which will culminate in the Rihla Summit in Abu Dhabi in September 2026. Again, I'm very grateful for all of you joining us, and especially for our panelists for being here. Thank you. I also have the pleasure of moderating this session. So before everything, I would like to actually come first to Dao to give us a brief overview of the current Gulf financing investments across South and Southeast Asia and to give us your reflections on the current state of affairs.
All right, thank you so much, Moran. So as Moran mentioned, so we just published our report on Gulf financing and also investment when it comes to green growth in South and Southeast Asia. But unfortunately, we cannot bring our colleagues from South Asia here. So I think for the sake of this panel, so we focus more on Southeast Asia. So I think that the Rihla initiative it was invented in a very exciting time because as you know that like in May this year, this is the first time when the ASEAN, Gulf, and GCC and China summit was hosted the first time, and then it was like kind of like a really good signal of change when it comes to like the collaboration between 3 sides. But particularly with the Gulf and also ASEAN, there has been long been like a traditional when it comes to like collaboration, especially in the renewable energy. And then if you're interested, the full manuscript of the policy brief, please go to Rihla website. But in general, I would like to like summarize a focus more on the relationship between the US, Japan, also with your like your country I think that we like the trying to diversify the financial assets. Given global south region, especially Southeast Asia, so much funding in some project, particularly on the large scale, when it comes to virtual diagnostic, particularly also in small. And then this signals some important issues for the collaboration Southeast Asia and the Gulf. So first of all, there's like a trend to really try to portray the Gulf as not only as a financial, but also as a co-creator in terms of resilient development. Particularly Southeast Asia is one of like the most vulnerable and this is like to climate change. Secondly, we hope to like invent like an integrated digital investment platform. So currently we have a platform for ASEAN and this summit, but actually sometimes people particularly focus on green investment. So hopefully we can have a task force or like a coalition. Thank you. Um, with the hope that there will be much more concrete also regional tailored to the specific context in Southeast Asia. Third, we hope to focus more on decentralized innovation and community-led solution. Basically, because even though like we kind of try to like combine also see South and Southeast Asia as the whole region because we have so many shared issues also priorities, but actually like different countries in Southeast Asia in ASEAN have different issues. So that's why community-led solution and also adhering to the local context is really important. And last but not least, we hope to come up with a shared adaptation priorities and risk management simply because like at all the regional and also international forum and also like I think the general trend right now is that we focus much more on mitigation instead of adaptation. And there are a few reasons behind that. I think first of all is because mitigation projects are much more profitable than adaptation project. So that's why this is something that through Rihla initiative with like different policy council members and later like implementation council members, we hope to also try to bridge the gap between mitigation and adaptation and come up with a more comprehensive and holistic approach when it comes to green investment and green growth, economic growth in South and Southeast Asia. So that is like the summary of the report.
Thank you very much, Dao. We're very fortunate to have three of our Policy Council members joining us today here. We have Mackenzie King, Dabi Al-Muhannadi, as well as Raya Puno. Mackenzie and Raya are part of the Policy Council for South and Southeast Asia, and Dabia is part of the Gulf Committee. So she's traveling from Doha today here, and Raya is usually based in Singapore, but now she's here, as well as Mac, who is based in Bangkok. So I'll start with Mac, actually. So from your perspective, how can Gulf move from being primarily financiers to becoming strategic co-creators of resilient development in the region after really looking at all of the current investments, but also what is needed from the region?
Oh, thank you for this question. I think I will maybe stray away from the idea of how, because we know how to do co-creation. I think co-creation is not necessarily rocket science. There are good examples of projects that have been done in the region that have done this appropriately. I think the thing that I will say is that it takes time and it takes very deep listening and true integration of local wants and needs, and it makes projects better. So the how is not as important because we can figure that out, but the why is very critical. And when it comes to, I think, the Gulf interests, we want to make sure that the projects that are being financed are the ones that are going to be sustainable and available long term, both for mitigation and adaptation. And in order for that to happen, like the people that are going to be affected and the experts that have the most information about how to make these projects most inclusive need to be a part of the process. And so it really comes down to me about the commitment, because ultimately it can't be something that's tokenistic. Putting together just a draft strategy and then asking for comment is not co-creation. A one-off co-creation workshop is not co-creation. but that also means that it doesn't mean that the funder doesn't get a say. I think that's really important. And I work on program development and fundraising, and I think some of the best inputs and the best changes to program design have come from funders that really know what they're doing, really know what they're talking about, and care about the communities that we care about. So I think ultimately it just comes down to ensuring that the co-creation actually takes place, that there's enough time allotted for it, because it's not fast and we can't expect it to be fast. But if we do it and we do it with that heart and that commitment, the project outcomes will be better, both financially for the communities and just probably more efficient.
From the funders you mentioned, could you give us some examples of who they are and if they've been successful, how can the Gulf states really learn from them?
Yeah, actually, I'd love to give this example. It's in a different topic, but we most recently made a partnership with the Nippon Foundation, so a Japanese foundation that works in disability inclusion, and they've been working on disability inclusion for 10 or 15 years. And so when we were developing a four-country rollout for updating all of our spaces for, I work at Impact Hub, which is an entrepreneur support organization, updating all of our spaces and our programs and building that community, making connections with OPDs. They were there to help and to kind of make sure. They're like, this is a little bit too much, this is not enough. And I see so much kind of rich expertise that's in the Gulf already about, desalination is a great example, where the actual funders can bring together experts from these Gulf countries to be able to add a lot of value to the projects that are being implemented as a piece of the puzzle. And that's I think the core of it is co-creation is you have to let go of the power dynamics and the hierarchies, and that's going to be hard. But I think showing really good examples and making sure we have case studies of where co-creation has gone really well is the most important part. And I'm happy to, send those through later.
Thank you very much. I'll now turn to Dabia. We know that the Gulf states are really focused on, let's say, mitigation as opposed to adaptation. How do we rebalance this portfolio towards more projects on water, agriculture, and resilience, in your opinion?
Thank you, Mehran. And hello, everyone. So, in the Gulf, traditionally, yes, there's a lot of focus on mitigation just because of the nature of the countries there. So, most of them are hydrocarbon exporters. So the net income coming into the countries are from hydrocarbon sales. So they are very aware that there would be some targets or environmental targets that they have to be in response to. So they need to understand that there should be a transition, energy transition. There is also a decarbonization strategy set in place. So from that perspective, I think mitigation has always been thought about, okay, that's what we'll have to do next when the regulation or the world will stop buying our products. So we need to be ready for that. So it's always thought about it from a technical perspective, what is feasible on the ground that could be done. So there's a lot of talk about the use of carbon capture and storage. And even though there's not that, it's one of the largest scale projects, but it's not as large as you would expect it to be. It's posing the GCC countries, especially the ones with good reservoirs, to be at the forefront of being carbon capture sinks of the world. And that already puts them at an advantage. So mitigation for them comes very hand, like as the next, say, 30 years, something that we'll have to go into. So the challenge there was how can you make mitigation low cost that it doesn't affect your operations right now? And you can see initiatives from Saudi Arabia, initiatives in Qatar and the UAE in climate mitigation. So here also they started to talk a little bit about the energy transition in terms of like what would be the next fuel that would be coming out of these countries. And you already can see discussion from talks about blue hydrogen, which is when you take either natural gas or oil-based products and you do carbon capture and storage with it. And the most traditional way of thinking about it, or it's like the most mature technology, would be blue ammonia. And then there has been a lot of projects on blue ammonia in that sense, and already commitments and announced projects. I think Qatar has one of the largest ones, the combined ammonia urea production. So adaptation, I think from a technical perspective also that has been talked about, especially with the looking into it from two sides. One, the GCC is already at a very, it's an arid region. It's water scarce. It is doesn't have any food production, and so no country is self-sufficient 100% in food. So it looks like what the world would look like post climate change. So if nobody does anything, the world would look like the GCC. So smart agriculture has been thought about as a way of doing livelihood. Like, how can we continue living in the place that we are living at when we have the challenges of, like, say, we will not be exporting hydrocarbons in the future. We will have some people will not buy it anymore. We don't have enough to grow our own food. And if the world is say more water scarce in other places, we cannot import the food, so prioritization will change. So smart agriculture has been thought about it in that sense. So in terms of adaptation, sea level rise has been studied. There's a few work that has been done at KAUST, which is King Saud University, work at Hamad bin Khalifa University in Qatar. There has been also work in terms of adaptation technologies. I think there has been talks in Oman and the UAE about it. There has been a lot of discussion from a technical perspective, but they're still looking into it. Okay, what can we do to make sure sea level rise does not affect the most of the population which lives along across the coast. So if you look at the populations along the GCC, most of them live around coastal cities with a few exceptions. So it's mostly looked at in that sense. And then also because there has been an increase in rainfall, even though it's super water scarce, in one day you would get an entire rainfall that you get in a year. And that's happening in Dubai, that's happening in Doha, that's happening in Jeddah, that's happening in different places. So in terms of, they're thinking for adaptation in terms of protecting the infrastructure. The word climate resilience has been coming out recently in discussions in terms of like setting the strategies in post 2030. So the countries with the newer strategies or drafting the newer strategies, like, okay, now we need to think about resilience in general. But in terms, and also in terms of climate tech investments, maybe with some in the sovereign wealth funds or allocating some of their funds for adaptation technologies, just to be early adopters of the technology and to be in there when the technology gets deployed so they can get a share of the benefits in the future, which is the right approach if we think about it from an economic perspective. That's what's happening in the GCC.
Thank you very much. So, Raya, to build on the conversation, so we understand that the GCC has their own interests and priorities, but it's important to understand the priorities of the region itself, that is the destination of these investment flows. So, in your opinion, what makes Southeast Asia a strategic, let's say, a geographic location for GCC investments, and how can we make sure that, as the points Dabia raised, to steer the conversations at least towards more adaptation focused projects as well?
So South and Southeast Asia is very vulnerable, climate vulnerable. It's one of the most vulnerable regions and has the most vulnerable countries in the world. But at the same time, it's also coupled with high growth potential and rapid urbanization. So ASEAN states, for example, are some of the fastest growing economies. And I think there's so much room and opportunity for Gulf states to come in and catalyze on this growth. It's a unique opportunity for resilience building while tapping into this fast growing market. And there's so much opportunity for joint development that's resilient and climate proof. In terms of, I'd like to add on also to the how to balance adaptation and mitigation. I think that goes into co-creation as well. we have to remember that when funders come in, it needs the projects that they come in with still needs to be needs based, and I think focusing on projects that may result in co-benefits for both adaptation and mitigation will create trust because it addresses the needs of both the receiving countries and also the investors that are coming in. So adaptation projects that will reduce the climate risks to the country will be very helpful. And we do that by integrating climate risk into investment decisions. So it doesn't necessarily need to be fully adaptation or fully loss and damage. It could be addressing projects or focusing on projects that are that result in co-benefits. So some examples of that would be for example, battery storage for disaster response or water efficient cooling systems. So those are both projects that would address not only mitigation but adaptation and would result in benefits for both parties as well.
Thank you very much. So if we build on this and look at the institutional relationships between the GCC and ASEAN, for example, so in the past few years, we've seen a growing diplomatic engagements between the GCC as an institution and ASEAN as an institution in the multilateral format, but also bilateral between the countries themselves. In my opinion, I really think these efforts are critical for both understanding of the regional dynamics as well as regional priorities, but they also contribute to expanding their relationship both economically and politically. So how do you see the recent high-level dialogues contributing to more green investments by the GCC states in South and Southeast Asia?
Yeah, I think first of all, I agree with Mackenzie that like when we talk about any like bilateral or like multilateral relationship, it's not like the most important question here is why, like why does the two party GCC and ASEAN should collaborate? And I think it's tied out to like international relation as well when it comes to economic collaboration. When lately, like I think that historically, also traditionally, ASEAN states have been always like kind of like fight themselves in between like different great powers like the US, China, and also different country as well. And then I think also until like recently, I think in the last 1 decade that when DCC country has been trying to diversify the financial methods and also like trying to look into different direction and also different countries and regions in the global south that they started to notice more on like ASEAN as a regional collaboration and regional organization, and also as a Southeast Asian country, because like there are so many like very advanced economic development state like Singapore, but also there are also many like emerging economic powers, right? You know, like Indonesia, Vietnam, and also Thailand as well. And I think the main question here is that I think the momentum to collaborate is there. I think one of the main challenge when it comes to like collaborating with ASEAN, but also like it's also come back to like the question with DCC is that how institutionalized both organizations are. And then the problem here is that in ASEAN, it's I think Rihla, we agree with me that it's kind of hard to like find a common ground between different ASEAN states because we have different priorities and also different economic priorities and different situation. And then the economic development gap between different countries in Southeast Asia is pretty high as well. So I think the main thing here is that trying to like find a common ground and the common priorities for ASEAN countries to collaborate with DCC states. And then of course, like there has been like so many renewable energy projects that have been running in Southeast Asia in the moment. But like if you look at like the official statement and also document between ASEAN and also DCC, there are also like lots of like room and revenue to collaborate between digitalization and also economic collaboration in general as well when it comes to like smart city, but also like when it comes to like new technology that ASEAN countries generally don't really have, for example, like decentralization. So that is something that really important that we can start with something like we can start with like some relatively small and also like it's kind of like second channel diplomacy when it comes to like technical building and also people to people exchange as well. For example, like sending or like establishing like a joint task force or like sending like ASEAN expert to GCC and so like vice versa, and then we can learn from each other. And then I'm sure that like not only ASEAN countries can learn from the GUP, but like the GUP can also like learn from like some leap experience, also like real-time experience from Southeast Asia, because I do think that even though like we as like the globe like share similar and also common problems, but at the same time like ASEAN has like some like unique challenges that the Gulf can also like try to like adapt and also learn from ASEAN as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think it's very important for the existence, let's say, of ASEAN in this context, because when we compare our work, I'm looking at the four other regions as well. So, what really stands out within the context of Southeast Asia is the existence of this regional organization, where while there are other regional organizations elsewhere in the world, it's actually very focused on climate issues. It's actually focused on investment issues, and that provides a venue for the Gulf states to really look into possibilities. But to turn into specific topics, so Mackenzie, let's look at water. And in your opinion, can the Gulf states really play a constructive role in supporting regional water diplomacy, for example, around shared water basins in South Asia, where tensions are also very high? But also, we have the issue with dams that we were discussing earlier this morning. So it would be great if you could expand on that.
Yeah, absolutely can. Um, well, I think building on what Dao was talking about, I think that the Gulf can play a very interesting role in diplomacy. There's a significant power dynamic between Southeast Asia and China, and also some tensions between South Asia and China, especially when we're relating it to water. And there are mechanisms that already exist to, begin to take and aggregate some of the challenges that downstream countries are facing. One of them that's a good example is like the Mekong River Commission that's based in Vientiane. And they're doing water monitoring, early warning systems, and they need funding to be able to do this, and they also need the funding to be able to actually align the other actors and make sure that these warning systems are happening in all these local areas, and then to aggregate that information. So I think that actually supporting from more of the technology side and the monitoring side is a very good first entry point to where testing the waters, if you will, on what that could look like to play that diplomacy role, because it's also quite needed. And there are other ones as well. Like there's an India and Bangladesh have a joint river commission. They could collaborate with ICIMOD, which is also doing a lot of work in transboundary water stuff in South Asia. IUCN and Oxfam also have platforms for transboundary water cooperation. But an example, like specifically, and this maybe brings up some of the later questions, but there's a project called Surveyor, which was run by ADPC, which was largely funded by USAID, and this is doing satellite imagery, especially related to water, but other things as well in Southeast Asia, and they've lost quite a lot of funding. And they're doing really great work. And this work is spanning a lot of those technological developments and cooperation related technology that I think that the Gulf, if they wanted to get involved, that would be, I think, a very low hanging fruit to be able to support first.
Thank you. Thank you. It's important because Dabi also mentioned this earlier that while adaptation is not as attractive, let's say, for the Gulf states, but there is the issue of food security and how water could have an impact on that. And obviously, at the end of the day, it will reach the Gulf states as well. So if I want to turn to Dabia, we really hear about, let's say, work that is focused on desalination in the Gulf and how we want to look at um, Gulf states as really the leaders, let's say, at desalination work. It's really world class, but often it's really costly for a Southeast Asian country. So how can these technologies be adapted for local contexts, like in Bangladesh or Myanmar?
I think it's also worth to remember, like desalination the technology itself did not come from the GCC.
Yes.
It was developed in the West, and through actually correct partnerships and joint ventures that the technology was customized and scaled in the GCC. So if you look into the early days of desalination technology adaptation in the GCC, most of them were like thermal technologies. So that means that they believed that the GCC had an abundance of energy. So it didn't matter how much energy was wasted as long as you would have water. Again, that ties up to the fact that there was no fresh water in the GCC. In Qatar, there's no rivers, the groundwater is mostly depleted. Same thing in Saudi, most of the groundwater has been depleted in 1980s to actually trying to solve the food security issue with growing some of their own crops for either agriculture fodder or wheat, for example, that ended up depleting most of the freshwater sources, with the exception of few higher elevation regions. So the technology has evolved, yeah. So what did the GCC do? They learned from their own mistakes. So they were like, okay, no, energy efficiency does matter to us. We don't want to be burning oil or burning gas to have as much water as we have. We want to have more efficient desalination technologies. So they came up with a set of regulation and technical perspectives. Like, one, we want it to be in a very small, concise area. We only have this limited amount of coastal areas that we can put and install desalination technologies on. They brought the technology provider. This is multinational companies, whether they're based in Japan or they are based in Spain or they are based in the US. And they said, okay, these are the technical perspectives that we need. These are the limitations, and this is what's happening. We have rising temperature of the water itself that makes it a little bit harder to extract water out of it. We need to put a limitation on the brine that is put back after the desalination. As you would think about it, desalination cannot be like 100%. You just put water and then you get salt. Actually, what do you do with that salt? So salt actually gets concentrated and put back into the Gulf, and through the water cycle, it gets diluted back. You cannot have zero liquid discharge. It has been discussed a lot, and it was eliminated as a technology because there is no space. What would you do with all of the salt that you would generate? And it also brought in the discussions, like you need to understand what the policy is coming about. So you cannot just have a scientific claim that is not backed up, and then you don't think about how you can deploy that. So they learned a lot. One, through the technology itself, two, through what policy makes sense in order with the technology. And now the newer set of technologies that are being adopted are RO, reverse osmosis, which was not commercialized or as mature, say, 15 years ago. So I think those lessons could be transferred to areas with water scarcity like Bangladesh. So one of the things it would be then to understand how those joint agreements has been done. So how did the Gulf was able to have a good joint agreement with the technology provider? Did they come up with a good shared revenue streams? Like how much would they be paying? How well would the technology be maintained? Then they developed the technology to become more efficient, more compact, and more localized. And I think areas in Southeast Asia would be a little bit different set of challenges. So I don't think there would be also a lot of like technical expertise, and there should be a lot of like training of the population to be able to deploy these technologies and understand it. And this also takes time. So also as part of the GCC learning through the work of desalination, there has been training of the local capacity to understand the limitation of the technology, how to maintain it themselves, to understand what would be the new set of technical KPIs that would be needed. So that didn't happen overnight. Had with collaboration with academia, building educational programs, with beta testing of technologies, and understanding how contracts are done. And I think the GCC can take that knowledge and help set up those projects. I believe there has been some of the friendship funds or development funds that are set up in the GCC focused solely on water. And I think they're going with those learnings in place. And I think the stakeholders could be like, say, a local water utility company that has a lot of knowledge in the GCC can share that with the developing desalination tech.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Obviously, technology is key, but it's also expensive, let's say. So the newer technology is more expensive, I'm assuming, as well. And that's something that we need to also discuss in the context of the investments and how those technologies could be transferred to countries such as Bangladesh and Myanmar, who don't really necessarily have the capacity or ability to purchase that. So it's really here again where the Gulf states could act and play the vital role as the climate finance leaders that they want to, but to be able to contribute to these initiatives as well. So Raya, if we look at the gendered impact of water is insecurity, which is very grave, what role can Gulf-backed finance play in empowering women-led adaptation projects specifically?
So definitely, empowering women-led adaptation projects is a huge priority in the region. And the Gulf Finance can definitely support women-led cooperatives and social enterprises and SMEs. There's a lot of mobilization for women-led organizations in Southeast Asia. And they can offer targeted grants, capacity building, and microfinance for these projects. As we all know, like gender and climate change is a huge issue, and those that are specifically affected by climate change have their own specific experiences and knowledge of these matters. And embedding gender criteria into this investment and portfolios mandates would help focus give a particular focus also to the needs of these sectors for sure. I think working with grassroots women's organizations would be very helpful. They have all the experience and they have the research to back up the knowledge that they have, and there's a lot of them within the region for sure.
Which countries would you position within this category in the context of the need, urgent need for specific women-led initiatives?
Well, I would specify the Philippines because that's my example. For example, there's a lot of research on how climate change affects women specifically, and there are a lot of researchers in the Philippines who focus on that issue. For example, on how climate change affects livelihoods of Filipinos, and specifically how women are sort of bear the burden, the most burden when it comes to that, in terms also of loss and damage, and when their houses are affected, when their livelihoods are affected, it is usually the women who bear the brunt of that. So these experiences and all these research would definitely improve what we know, the knowledge of what we know, and how projects should take into account gender as it relates to climate change.
Thank you. So to Mac, how do you think, or why do you think we should make sure that the Gulf states really look at the gendered imbalance in the impact of water insecurity?
Well, why is that women are 50% of the population and deserve to drink water? But I think it also comes back to the quality of programming. I think we often think about women as beneficiaries, but what we have found time and time again, especially in the entrepreneurship space, is that gender mixed teams and all women teams are actually performing better by investment criteria. When you have more diversity in your experience and your viewpoints and your way of operating through the world, you come up with new solutions that are innovative and that fill a niche that have never been filled before. And simply put, we haven't had the amount of time where women have been able to have bank accounts in many parts of the world, where we've been able to actually see the fruits of women's intellect and ingenuity and creativity. You see it, but it's not financed. And so the financing of women and climate is again, it's not just a beneficiary side of things, but it's also about opening up what the possibilities of new technologies can look like with a group of people that sees it in a way that other people don't. You know, women are bearing the brunt of climate change more, which means that in all likelihood, if you're at the forefront seeing the problem, you'll probably have a more apt solution. And that's also the big why, is that just women are good investments.
To build on that, so what are some concrete steps that are needed to make Gulf Southeast Asia partnerships genuinely inclusive of youth, women, and SMEs, and not just state-to-state deals?
Well, I think this comes back to the idea of co-creation again. And yet again, it takes time. Yet again, it takes deep listening. But it also, more than anything, takes the commitment to integrating tough feedback and making sure that process is there. You know, I can sit here and try to list off step by step what to do, but there are like a million reports and toolkits that will help build this out. But what matters more than anything is the commitment to doing that and not compromising on it whatsoever. You know, if you have one of my acquaintances, like he works in climate investment, and he will turn down panels when there's not a woman on the panel. And he's like, you don't get to speak to me until we have more representation. And we need that kind of respect for inclusion, because it is critical from a human rights perspective. But again, it is also critical from an innovation perspective. And I think to make this easier, I don't think that we need to have, you know, Gulf countries that are specifically funding like youth groups that are doing, you know, climate hackathons. Like, I don't think that that's really the solution we're looking for. But I think what we could have is, you know, collaboration with organizations that are already doing fantastic work on the ground, and to build in pooled funding mechanisms to be able to actually build in, you know, support. Ideally, this is also support that could be grants, not just investment, and could lead to core funding of some of the organizations that are promoting the mainstreaming of youth, women, people with disabilities, Indigenous people within the entrepreneurship sector, and also building out capacity of these groups to build movements that actually are able to be heard and are able to say no. Because it also comes down to consent. And I think that this is something that needs to also be built into the mindset and is a core advocacy point that I would bring to the table when speaking with GCC countries, is that the people who are affected by your decisions, your investments, and your infrastructure are allowed to say no. And they're allowed to say no emphatically. And again, when that no takes place, it's not a checkbox. You know what I mean? Like, free, prior, informed consent is not a checkbox. If a community says no, you co-create and build something that they want, that they're going to say excitedly yes to.
Thank you. On that point, I'm also very happy that the majority of our panelists today are women. And on that note, I also, the majority of the council members of Rihla, we have 80, including the implementation council, and we have 41 female participants and 39 males. So I'm again very happy about that fact. To turn to Dao, so as this conversation until now has shown, I think we really wanted to make sure that the project moves beyond just looking at renewable energy. And that's really at the heart of what the Gulf states are involved in. It's solar panels all over the world with Masdar, Mubadala, Aqua Power, and whatnot. But we really wanted to look at other sectors, particularly for infrastructure, industrialization, water, agriculture, and other things that were discussed today. So if we want to look at this infrastructure specifically, Dao, so what role should a dedicated GCC SSEA infrastructure forum play in aligning priorities, reducing duplication, and supporting cross-border collaboration and connectivity projects?
I think that's a tough question, to be honest. I also like it just because also like in Southeast Asia specifically, but also like in other part of the world, like normally I think investor also country tend to have like a tendency to really focus on like big cities or like mega cities instead of like secondary or like smaller cities. And then it has been creating like the uneven development across the country. For example, like in Thailand and the Philippines, like, you know, Bangkok and Manila, the other part of it, like it has been like relatively less developed than like the capital city or like the mega cities. And then I think to this point, I think in ASEAN particularly, we have like different networks for ASEAN, for example, like ASEAN Smart City Network, but also like in Asia Pacific as well. So we have like United local, like UCLG for like local governance in Asia Pacific, and ASEAN is kind of like, and then the headquarters it's located in Indonesia as well. And then I think the main problem here is that so first of all, there are different like the network, especially when it comes to like green and smart city, all the investment and facility comes to like big cities. So if you go to like see like Singapore or even Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh City, so they have metro now, and then it's very like modern and then smart like application of like machine learning or AI. But at the same time, when it comes to like a smaller city, like right next to Hanoi, which is my hometown, you don't really see like the green, also like the smart city happening there. So I think it is like a really sweet spot for DCC country to step in and also invest in smaller or like secondary cities. I think simply because they're kind of like a dilemma when it comes to like infrastructure investment in Southeast Asia. So like on the one hand, so China doesn't really have like uh too much condition when it comes to like human rights or like inclusivity when it comes to like their fund from even like uh SME or like state-led companies or like multilateral development bank like AIIB. And that's like create like that receive like some critics from like different expert because like, it lacks of like human rights safeguard. But at the same time, like I think in particular because like Vietnam also has been like I'm talking about in my country, so Vietnam has been also like collaborating and receiving so many funds from Japan or from the EU, but actually like the bar for like human rights is so high and it's require like a really huge change in the way that they are doing things and also like in terms of like institutionalization of like human rights safeguarding as well. So sometimes like there's pushback because it's too much work for them and then they don't really want to change it. But I think that like DCC is like right in the middle. So it can also like embed what has been mentioned by Rihla or like Mackenzie when it comes to like human rights or like inclusivity or like women-led or like women participants in investment and also like different aspect. But at the same time, it also like doesn't really have like a really strict conditions of like human rights safeguard when it comes to investment or like inclusivity than the EU or like other countries in the West. And then by really focusing more on like investing in like secondary cities and then try to like build like a cross city connection infrastructure, for example, like railway, which is like which is like a problem for so many countries in Southeast Asia, or like trying to like fund some like capacity building programs regionally so that you bring like expert from both DCC and also ASEAN when it comes to like infrastructure, and then they can exchange knowledge and also best practices from one country or one city to another. And I think that by doing so, then the gov can really build its reputation as like convener when it comes to like city building and infrastructure investment. Yeah.
So how smart are these cities? Like you mentioned some of them, but and how big are these cities? Because for example, in the GCC itself, like in Dubai and even Doha, I've seen that there are some very small neighborhoods that are being called, for example, technology city or media city or education city or whatnot. But there are really small neighborhoods within obviously within the context of a bigger city. Um, how important is it to really go this route of smart cities or whatnot? And how would that really contribute to the actual city life itself in the context of these capitals that you mentioned?
Yeah, so I think it's important to couple a smart city with green city. For example, like when it comes to like land reclamation to increase adaptation readiness for so many Southeast Asian country. Oftentimes, even in my country, which we have been like trying to like develop and also like implementing so many land reclamation in coastal cities, but actually like because we lack of like the most modern technology. So that's why like what we have been doing, like the practices have been really like destroying or like affecting the natural habitat in a very negative way. And then like I believe that if we have like more like updated or like modern technology when it comes to like land reclamation to build like a new city towards the sea, then it will be like greener and also more sustainable.
Thank you. There was a point on Vietnam, but I'll ask it from Raya actually. So, Oman recently had a partnership with Vietnam's solar sector, which shows how the Gulf Sovereign Wealth Fund can be paired with national partners to deliver local ownership and green growth. What lessons do you think can be drawn from this model for scaling renewable projects across Southeast Asia?
But
Yes, what
um,
partnership?
from what I've read about this project, I think that the key lessons that we learned from there is that there was such a strong coordination with the government from the funder side with the government. So they aligned the national development plans and they worked with local trusted platforms in order to come up with a project that is truly localized and can be accepted by their domestic partners. So I think that's definitely vital. Um, it goes back into the necessity for needs-based projects, understanding what the local needs are, what the developments of the country are, rather than coming up with projects um, that are funder driven. Um, I think there was a lot of also flexibility in the project structuring, working with what Vietnam has and what they can offer. Um, and a lot of patience from both sides, I think, is very important. There's a lot of understanding that needs to happen even before the project pushes through and before the project is approved. So understanding where each person is coming from, what their priorities are, and what their needs are is very important. And I think that's something that happened. I believe that there was also focus on other social impact projects aside from the main RE projects that were happening. So things like social impact projects such as like restoring classrooms, for example, or even something as simple as planting trees. It builds camaraderie between the people who are coming in and the local communities that are already there, and shows goodwill on both sides as well, that it's not just an investment project, it's not just a profit driven project, but it's joint collaboration and co-creation for real, basically.
Thank you. So Dabia, like what strategies would you look at, for example, if you want to, let's say, advise golf players and golf companies in terms of creating value chains? And we're looking at this growing interest in critical minerals, batteries, and whatnot. And so, how do you see the Gulf states really playing a bigger role on this, but obviously contributing to the national context of those partner countries as well?
Yeah, excellent question. So there has been a lot of discussion about getting into the battery game. I think Raya just mentioned it a few points earlier. And these are like one of the highlighted projects that it would be of interest is getting access to minerals in terms of getting security for the next generation technology, and at the same time having the right partnership in place. There's also the element of economic diversification that comes into play. So a lot of the GCC countries are looking into economic diversification away from hydrocarbons. So these strategies are looking into going down the tech world, from the AI applications, semiconductors, and all of these kind of things that would be actually reliant heavily on like extracted minerals. And I think the GCC doesn't have access to that, so they're looking into partnerships in doing it for sure. One of the biggest countries have done investment in minerals would be Saudi and UAE. Qatar, I think, has been doing some investment in that space as well, to a lesser extent. And I think this is technology tied, so it's tied to chips. It's tied to some critical minerals that will be needed in batteries as well. So these are the two. What was the second part of your question?
What strategies would you recommend really to the GCC states in terms of how they can create these value chains within a national context, but most importantly within a regional context? So if you actually want to look at it in a context of regional integration in terms of this value chain and the critical minerals, and how the countries within neighboring countries could contribute to these efforts as well.
Yeah, so I believe that GCC should go at it from a different perspective, not including a lot of things that have been discussed already. Definitely would have to look into the ESG side of it, but also the impact of it. So whenever we have a lot of learning that has been done so far. So when we're going about an economic investment, should look at a different type of aspects. I think that would create a stronger collaboration. And I think in terms of the strategy, it always tied up to the economic transition and the energy transition that will make it stronger in terms of allocating funds from the GCC side and having higher commitments. And I think it should be done at multi-levels. So whenever doing an investment, it should go from not just a bilateral investment, but looking into institutions who can collaborate together, and then the community level. And this could go through building, say, cultural exchange programs that could go around with it. And there has been successful cultural exchange programs like the Club Culture Year, for example, having a stronger presence in terms of like conducting maybe some education level programs and looking into ways of measuring these impacts, not just in terms of the economic output, but in terms of how did the GCC build these connections. And I think in a world where they have a lot of like geopolitical instability, the GCC itself is trying to diversify their political alliances outside of like the main powers. And I think in terms of having those regional collaborations, you'd have a stronger tie, not just an economic one.
Thank you very much. So, if we look at Mac, if we look at the current, let's say, state of affairs here in this context of the USAID closure and let's say the significant decrease in European funding and project within Southeast Asia, but I would say all over the global South. Let's look at it in both ways. So how can we make sure that the GCC can fill this role in the sense of the gaps that are there in terms of funding? And how could the GCC be seen as an attractive partner for the Southeast Asian countries as well?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Yeah, there's been obviously the massive cuts of USAID, and then the changing trajectory and strategy of Europe of how they spend their funds. It's going much more to defense and not much to aid. One thing we have to realize is that the strategy of the US in Southeast Asia was much more in terms of, pro-democracy, bolstering of CSO groups, and really the countering of China. Like that was the core of it. So the projects that were funded have this in mind in some ways, but not fully, right? So and the funding from Europe looks a lot different, but it has subsided. So one example is SIDA from the Swedish. Like they really pulled pretty much all of their grants from Southeast Asia and now are looking much more to Africa to invest. So with this being said, there's ample opportunity right now to be able to support the organizations that have had the capacity built for the past couple of decades. Up until the last 5 years, where there's been a massive amount of progress in terms of, river monitoring that has been supported by USAID, a lot in terms of adaptation and innovative agriculture. So if we want to talk about adaptation and resilience and food, one really great example, actually, aptly named, is called Water and Energy for Food, which was a project that a few countries collaborated on, but it was around 50% funded by USAID. And it was dropped. However, they did years of amazing work. They made investor guides for funding innovations in the water, energy, food nexus. They had links to great innovators themselves that were much more at the growth stage in food security, in water security technology, like very, very interesting companies that they were supporting, and also like investment landscape mapping. And I think the website only closed down in March. You can find it on the Wayback Machine. So it still exists, and you can have access to all these investor guides. And this program specifically was for South and Southeast Asia, Southern and Central Africa, and the Middle East and North Africa. So the exact same target countries, exact same target regions. And I think this is one of the areas where you have kind of an ample playing field to be able to support some of these fantastic initiatives. And yeah, you can come in with your own spin on it, but then again, just go back to the co-creation, understand what people want, understand where the priorities and where the values can align, and try to work on that. But I would be so heartbroken if I saw some of these incredible initiatives just get completely lost. It makes me sick that all of this work might just disappear to time. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and so much money and time has already been invested. So now actually the Gulf countries, by supporting these initiatives, can reap a lot of the benefits that the money of Americans sowed. And that seems like a pretty pretty good deal to me, if I'm being honest.
Is if they have access to those data and information as well.
Yeah, Wayback Machine. You can find it. It's available. It's there.
Good point. So Dawa, in our work in the past 6 months for the Rihla initiative, one of the biggest elephants in all of the rooms has been China. And and it's interesting to see because the first time I actually got really engaged on the topic of China and let's say Gulf climate financing was in our first workshop for Central Asia. And what I came out of that discussion with was that nothing the Gulf can do in Central Asia without Chinese partnership. Basically, all of the projects that are major projects by Aqua Power, Master, and whatnot in Central Asia are technically implemented by China, by Chinese partners. Same thing is going on in the African context, but not as let's say major, but also all over the Middle East and North Africa. But now today I'm the closest to China. I'm here in Thailand, and I'm pretty sure that the majority of let's say collaborations between Chinese and GCC companies within the context of Southeast Asia is also significant. So how do you see the role of, again, the Chinese players within the context of Southeast Asia, and how does that really bode well with competition or cooperation with GCC investments?
Yeah, thank you, Miran. So for those who don't know, I live in China for 5 years. So actually I have lots of experience working with investor policymakers, but also academia and also practitioner in terms of investment and green policy and green growth in general. And then I think the main problem, I think it's unlike Central Asia. So in Southeast Asia, you can do things without collaborating with China. But the main thing is like one of the main challenges when it comes to investor and as investment is that when it comes to Southeast Asia, in so many countries, you have to break the barriers, and then in order to break the barrier, you need to have what you call in China is guanxi or like relationship, and then because like normally it's not easy for government, for example, like for my government to buy a new investor just because like they are kind of like very skeptical, also like not skeptical, but like very careful when it comes to like external investment and what is will be the consequences when it comes with the green investment or the different types of investment. And obviously, I think that the main reason why there was the first ASEAN, DCC, and China summit was because China traditionally has been a really big player, like one of the two biggest player in Southeast Asia, and then it has so much influence and so many relations, and then so many they know like how to do work in Southeast Asia and maybe in South Asia in general. So even though like there are some political backlash or when it comes to a different country, because of a different theoretical dispute or different like political disputes that I won't name it here. But actually, I think one of the easiest way for these countries to break the market is that to collaborate with China. So I think, in my opinion, that is the main reason why there has been like a three parties summit in KL earlier this year, and it's also like create a really nice position for like the global south or like south-south collaboration between the three big, I would say like three big players in the global south, simply because like by gathering with each other and also like try to like creating like not a formal coalition like the US has been doing with like India or like Japan and also Australia. But in a sense, like this relationship can also gradually build trust, because trust is really important when it comes to Southeast Asia, like as in other country as well. So by simply like by fighting China as like a bridge to collaboration between DDC and the DDC and ASEAN, because the relationship, to be honest, has been relatively new. It has been like a decade or more. So China can serve as like a bridge between DCC and the Gulf. And then also China has been rich in terms of financial resources and natural resources as well. So I would say that like it is definitely a win-win relationship, and then it's also signal like a really positive changes in the way that the financial flow and so the green investment changing in Southeast Asia and also South Asia in general.
It is often a win-win-win, let's say, a situation for within the context of the triangulation between the local country, the country of let's say, for investment, China and the Gulf. But as I also learned from that workshop with our Central Asian colleagues, the local companies are being left out. And actually, one of our policy council members was explaining how her own company was basically almost shattered because of the fact that they couldn't really compete with the Chinese implementers of those projects within their context of their own national territories. So in that line, right, there is often local opposition to large projects. So how can Gulf partners ensure free, prior, and informed consent, benefit sharing, and safeguards are embedded from the outset?
I think collaborating with local government would be very important. There's so many local government champions for climate um, um, that has been looking for partners for years now. They have so much wealth in knowledge and local capacity and connections with local communities. For example, I would say like in the Philippines, like all local governments are required to submit local climate change action plans that already lists out all the needs that they have, the projects that they want to be funded. Um, and it's not being utilized to the most of its um, t- by outside investors. And if we're looking for bankable projects, if we're looking for projects that have already have the support of local government, that's the first thing I would look at, right? Um, so then definitely, I think there's so much opportunity in working with smaller communities and local government. Um, Also because they know exactly the needs of the people that they're going to be working with. They already have the networks, the sectors that they've readily been consulting, always been consulting, and also because that they know the impacts specifically and how it impacts the community that they're handling. um, so for sure, I think that's an opportunity that needs to be tapped, and that I think that the knowledge is already there. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll go back to Mac. So, could lessons from a Gulf industrial policy be adapted to ensure Gulf investments in Southeast Asia generate local jobs and basically support SME participation? That's really why I'm saying this is that we often hear about mega projects, but Gulf capital support can Gulf capital support community level infrastructure and secondary cities in Southeast Asia as well?
Well, I mean, it certainly can. I think it comes down to ticket sizes, in no small part. I think the Gulf as of right now, at least from the entrepreneurial perspective, I'm much more familiar with the entrepreneurial perspective rather than infrastructure, but the ticket sizes have been massive. So you're really only looking for, like kind of in the entrepreneurial sense, unicorns. And so I'm thinking in infrastructural sense, it's also the easiest to fund massive infrastructure projects. But with that comes a lot of challenges, like Rihla was talking about. And I think, Rihla, you have a more positive outlook towards local government than maybe I do. Um, I would say that collaborating with small local government agencies is very important, and also collaborating and making sure that a part of the process that civil society organizations that are going to offer tough feedback is absolutely critical. Um, because you want to make sure that the infrastructure that you're creating is actually, you know, not going to be processed to that for the next few years. And I think again, you've seen what happened in Bangladesh last year, Nepal, Indonesia. There's protests in the Philippines. People are not putting up with it anymore when there's massive amounts of corruption in infrastructure projects, when government is taking their cut. But that means that there's a lot of opportunity, especially when you're collaborating with secondary cities, because these are often overlooked. So those types of ties and maybe those ways of working are slightly different, and maybe they can be altered a little bit. Um, and I also wanted to tag on to this is that, again, from an entrepreneurial perspective, if you only fund the late stage high growth enterprises, you'll fund them once. If you fund early stage enterprises and the organizations that are developing those entrepreneurs, when you actually help to sow the seeds, you'll get a lot of unicorns. You'll get a lot of high growth potential out of the sweet out of the pipeline, right? And I think this also comes down to infrastructure and the secondary cities, right? In the same way, you're not going to have this large interconnected infrastructure project unless you do some of the baseline development in those secondary cities to allow for the intake of those larger ticket size infrastructure projects. So it also is a necessity that if you don't start supporting them now, you won't have anything later to intake future investment.
Please.
So I might not be that optimistic about local government, but rather more pessimistic about national government. So, like in the Philippines, are the flood control issues are actually because it's national government projects in the local communities. So I do think like the benefit of projects that are born from local government is that they are best placed to monitor and verify that these projects are actually happening, right? And they're the people who are working there live there. They know the people. They know if it's happening and if it's working. Right.
But how do you deal with corruption in this context? Because obviously,
Big question. I good MRV systems, making sure that your safeguards are in place even before you start the project, and just getting good people. I guess that's all. I mean, I think with
hope
with
government's
experience in the Philippines, it's not the best person to maybe give a solution to corruption. Maybe.
I'll turn to now. So we've been discussing this in the context of the simulation exercise, the workshop, and now we have also the panels. That key recommendations have been creating platforms. So, for example, if the Gulf and ASEAN were to establish a joint resilience compact focused on adaptation governance, what should its priority be? Or if like ASEAN and GCC framework for be a vehicle for regional renewable energy readiness platform to harmonize standards and streamline investments, how could that? What would that look like?
So just before I answer this question, just want to add more like a very small point about what Mark has been mentioning about the secondary city. I think that one of the main reasons why I also advocate for like gov investment in secondary like smaller cities just because in urban planning. So I think there's like so many organizations and also like even like the United Nations has been trying to like do some pilot projects in like secondary like smaller city just because like it haven't been industrialized or like urbanized yet. So as well, like when you want to change something in the smaller cities, it's much easier, and then it's can easier to buy in or like receive like much less constraint or like opposition from like the local governance or like local community as well. And then that also like related to like the question that you just asked me. So I think that the priority here is that first of all, we need to like really think about the rationale, like why do you need like for example, like DCC ASEAN resilient compact or like collaboration first, and then secondly, I don't think that like without like carefully considering the current situation in both from both DCC priorities and also ASEAN needs and also priorities that we can do anything. So that's why I think that starting with something like Pi Life and starting with like some pilot project in general might help in terms of like really trying to like positioning and also like exploring which will be like the starting point or like which would be the breaking point in terms of like strengthening the DCC ASEAN collaboration in the future.
Thank you very much. So I'll actually end with Dabia before I turn to the audience. Looking ahead for the next 5 years, for example, what would success in Gulf, Southeast Asia, Greek cooperation really look like to you? Was it more capital, more institutions, or more inclusive outcomes?
Could be all of the above.
How would you prioritize them then?
Yeah, I think in terms of priorities, I think the easiest would be is to do the capital first. And I think in terms of areas, it would be the areas of climate resilience and adaptation. I think that's a joint challenge that both Southeast Asia countries and the GCC have in common. So they have both the need to have some proper climate adaptation. We'll see it in the islands first, and they will see it around the Gulf. I think having good investment in early warning detection systems, having proper access to global monitoring and models to understand weather patterns. I think having access to the Southeast Asia countries that could be joining that in terms of providing data, in terms of having access to IoTs that will help that, in terms of expertise, you can have better tracking models and you can have a better accurate picture of what will happen in the world. And I think those are easy places to go and justify investment in. Second would be to think about the shared values that they have in common, which is looking into the Gulf countries are well known to take care of their citizens. And I think they can have also based on their history, not to like decade ago, it's like 2 generations ago, they were nomadic population with no water or food or access. So I think they can relate a lot to having that opportunity to development. So I think there would be a strong interest in terms of joining countries and having proper development and transferring that knowledge. And also as a place with not the technical expertise, but a place where they imported the knowledge and place where we're looking into ways of generating our own knowledge as well, to having less reliance on imported knowledge. And they're doing that is number one is diversification. So I think diversification of aspects and knowledge and talents and access to talent pools. One aspect that McKinsey talked about is entrepreneurship programs. And I think there's a huge interest in the GCC in terms of that, looking in terms of incubation programs and looking for the next startups. And these areas would be for looking for deployment in climate tech, definitely would be one of the biggest areas of interest to the GCC. So I think that's in essence resilience, having better understanding, and then you can tie it up later on with more like say smaller projects.
Thank you. So I'll go through some of the questions that were sent to us online, but if you, the audience here has any questions, please do prepare them so that I can get back to you. I'll ask it to all of you, so please we'll go back through all four panelists to get responses. So one of the questions is, what do you think the GCC could learn from us, and specifically when it comes to climate finance? Could you give us some examples? And how can civil society actors participate in the collaboration between the GCC and ASEAN? A separate question is on given that countries such as Pakistan, the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and many more remain dependent on Gulf oil and fossil fuels, while also pursuing new offshore drilling projects in their own waters and continuing coal power plant permitting and construction, how does the Rihla initiative and more broadly the GCC, plan to support and enable a green transition and sustainable economic growth in South and Southeast Asia? And considering the economic challenges of inflation, currency devaluation, and political instability in countries such as Nepal, Pakistan, Cambodia, parts of Philippines, Myanmar, etc., how might these risks affect Gulf investments in the region, and how are the Rihla Initiative and GCC planning to navigate and mitigate these challenges while advancing sustainable development goals? I'll go through the room if anyone has a question for the participants. Please use the microphone.
Sorry, first of all, thank you. Great panel.
Thank you.
And I particularly resonate with the part about inclusion. But my question is also on climate finance, because a lot of the project, large scale infrastructure projects, particular that we talked about that we need for combating the climate change, are also projects with longer period of return and a very capital upfront investment. And we are also facing a huge financial gap from where we are now to meeting the net zero scenarios. And how do you think first of all, what's the risk appetite like for Gulf investors who are interested in investing in adaptation projects? And also, what do you think are some of the innovative financial structures that you think has the most potential in mobilizing more capital, new capitals into these projects? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Well, thank you very much. And indeed, thanks for this really illuminating panel. It's really rich discussion. I'm really impressed, and I'm very glad I'm spending my afternoon with you
Thank you.
today. I want to react actually to a couple of things that were said on the panel, if I may.
Please.
Last questions, as I've said that. First, one of your opening comment was why Asia, something of this nature. Why should GCC invest in Asia and in Southeast Asia in particular? And I just point you guys to a World Economic Forum report 2024 that says Asia is the center of the biodiversity crisis globally. And it's such an important topic because of the reasons shared by Rihla, that we are experiencing increased urbanization. It is mostly on the coastlines. There are giant youth populations in some countries that are now coming online and demanding more. And at the same time, our watersheds are under significant threats. We're seeing a lot more deforestation, producing a lot less water, a lot less hydrological flow than we used to. Thailand wants to become the data center capital of Southeast Asia. It doesn't have enough water, despite the fact what you're hearing outside. And there's been some ideas floated that they might need to flood some national parks, which is really counterintuitive to most people working in the nature space, as I am. So these are big problems that have an impact on GCC investments already, perhaps here. There are threats to the manufacturing centers. There are threats to the economy, frankly. The destruction of our watersheds and the continuous rates of deforestation we're experiencing. Just a final comment on China, a small comment on China. China is making massive investments in nature. A lot of people are focused on it's the battery technology sector, how it owns the solar sector, how just about every kind of renewable energy technology produced today is being produced in China, and they own like 90% of that market share. But they're not looking at the investments they are making in reforestation. 1 trillion trees to be planted in Mongolia with Chinese support because they share a border there. It's very important to them. Millions and billions and billions of dollars putting into these ecological red zones, which are hands off to industry because of their importance to the economy, etc. I don't need to go down the litany of reasons, but I would like to point attention to China as a leader in sustainability in nature conservation and protection for long-term economic resilience. And it's something for GCC Gulf investors to think about as well when they look to Southeast Asia. A second problem is this: carbon continues to grow in our atmosphere. Even if we were to stop our emissions today, that carbon stays up there. It's not going away, right? Only way to bend the curve is either through very expensive carbon capture and unproven carbon capture technology, or more investment in nature and things like mangroves and tropical forests, which are such big absorbers of nature, right? I'm sorry, of carbon. And along that line, now we switch to your second comment about the balance between adaptation and mitigation. It's true, renewables have been more profitable, and you're going to earn more in a shorter amount of time if you invest in that space. But if we look at the other side of the question, they've been a lot less profitable for some developing Asian countries, especially when they look to the coal reserves, which are right there and very cheap to absorb. And this is true in the Philippines, Indonesia, India, certainly. So it's been more profitable for some countries, some places, but not everywhere. It's actually still much cheaper to dig coal out of the ground. And poor countries can find themselves in another debt trap and a middle income trap if they take on too many of the loans required to set up these renewable industries in their countries. In fact, ADB's chief economist said at Rockefeller Foundation, I might mention Rockefeller Foundation since we're on their premises now, at their Asia Exchange event, the chief economist of ADB said that if we transition to renewables in Asia, it would add between 1 and 2, it would knock off rather 1 to 2.5% of the region's GDP. So a very big piece of the economy. Economies in this region would have to slow down. Now, nature-based solutions, they offer this balance between mitigation and adaptation. As you know, mangroves are very popular. Mangrove restoration right now is one investor called me the hottest thing in sustainability in our region. And that's because, right, you're mitigating some of the carbon that you might be through offsets. You might be mitigating some of the carbon that your industry outputs. At the same time, you're helping coastal cities adapt or coastal communities adapt to extreme weather. And then also they're providing the nurseries for tomorrow's fishes. Apparently, if we were to restore all of the mangroves that need restoring at this point, forgive me for getting the statistic wrong, weirdly, it's really wonky and out of shape right now. But basically, if we were to restore mangroves that have been destroyed over the last 20 years, we would add somewhere like between 600 and 700 million edible fish and non-vertebrates to our food system. It's a remarkable engine of food security. So it's a win-win-win situation, nature-based solutions. And I'm gonna come to an end here real
No,
fast.
please,
going.
please.
Please keep going.
Very kind of you, Mackenzie. Thank you very much. Where can GCC really be helpful? Now, putting aside all the important geopolitical dynamics that Dow covered, and others, of course, I really think that GCC can be helpful in three ways. One, definitely more attention to nature-based solutions and the innovative finance models that are coming out now. Blended finance models where they're supplemented by government commitments, multinational development bank commitments, private sector. GCC could come in even with a light touch with the credit guarantees. Not that that's not a risk you're taking, but credit guarantees for these blended finance instruments they're not as common as you think, and we need more risk there. We need people taking more risks on credit guarantees, de-risking some of these investments. And because the GCC is known too for having large sovereign wealth funds, which really long horizons, and looking at fixed income returns, right? They're perfectly placed to invest in these nature-based solutions because the horizons of these nature-based solutions investments are like minimum 30 years. They're 30, 50 years down the line. And so they're attractive to pension funds and again, sovereign wealth funds that want a mix of both high and low growth, low risk investments. So to the extent that the investment picture looks attractive from that point, there's one or two ideas for them. The other thing is, I think GCC would be helpful. Investments coming from the Gulf would be helpful to signal interest in some of these other, or they're still very niche, innovative finance models. I'm not talking about the blended finance models that are large and for ecosystem restoration. I'm talking like investments in biocredits. There's a lot of new firms coming out. They're trying to put integrity first and not make the same mistakes that the carbon markets did. Now, there's a lot of social entrepreneurs working in this space. Can medium to small size investments be taken to this region to develop biocredits around mangrove restoration, for example. So taking a lead there, also signaling commitments to sustainable fisheries and sustainable forestry work. Again, these are things that produce yields 14 years minimally, but more like 30 and 50 years. And then also, and lastly, a lot of focus in some Gulf states on technology. Many people don't realize just how far AI is taking nature technology. By nature technology, I'm talking about camera traps and bioacoustic technologies, but also satellite imagery and LiDAR, things like this. There are thousands of small cottage industries out there that are developing bespoke technologies for specific ecosystems. The hard thing about nature investment is that every ecosystem is so different. So you often need specific technologies to monitor the gains, the progress being made in restoration and/or nature-based solutions. Investing in these cottage industries alongside the larger players, whether it be Huawei or Ricoh or Panasonic, that would be very welcome as well. Taking a look at the technology space. I could go on. Let me leave you with just this, though, that depending on ticket size, again, the availability, rather, let me frame it like this. there seems to be plenty of finance out there, a lot of capital out there. The problem we're told is that there are not a lot of bankable investment opportunities. I think it's incumbent upon everyone on this panel and others that might be online to challenge that notion next. I think there are a lot of bankable solutions out there, but we're using that as an excuse not to make those investments because they come with some of the risks that are being also outlined by your panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This was great. And it's a lot of topics to really reflect on for us in the work that we're doing, hopefully in a forum with the other policy council members for Southeast Asia. And I will definitely make sure that we do touch on these. So if it'd be great if you could all take a minute or two to reflect to some of the questions, both online and from the participants here, and so that we can close. Let's start with Dao. I think I just turn it on.
Sorry. I think I just want to echo what have been said about the blended finance, because like for DCC countries, like they're very famous in terms of like SW like sovereign wealth finance. But I think that in fact, I think that there's a general trend in the world and also like in Southeast Asia that like there's a need of like a combination between the different types of finance, or from multilateral development bank, from private company as well, in a part of like a state-led financial loan. So that's why I think that's the first thing. The second one is about the importance of concession financial model as well, simply because like there's a lack of like profit when it comes to adaptation and even like nature-based solution as well. So the model of concession finance really give the benefits of like cost savings, and also like kind of try to like relatively like de-risk the short-term return, and then in the future when it comes to like long-term investment, then it can also have to like de-risk different also like can to support the subsidized layering to combine the different types of finance. And the last thing that I think that not DCC, it doesn't need to be like learned from ASEAN, but I think that one thing that ASEAN countries have been doing relatively well is that they're trying to like pilot and measure and scale, because like the lack of financial report or like bankable solution. So that's why.
Well, I believe that there is a lot of interest, definitely in nature-based solutions. And you mentioned mangroves, and in Qatar locally, they have like a large area in terms of preserving mangroves. And because mangroves is one of the few natural plants that grow in the water, and in a place where you don't have any land, and the land by itself, it has very poor soil, actually it comes out by nature itself. So you can see, take inspiration from nature, what kind of solutions do work. But I think there, in terms of like carbon negative technologies, there should be effort, not just from the GCC and Southeast Asia. Should be from like the more industrialized nations that bear most of that burden, since they were polluting since the beginning of like the last century. So I think there shouldn't be as much of urgency on these nations for climate negative solutions. But I think the focus should be on protecting the people and the infrastructures. There also there's a lot of interest in terms of like microgrids and micro solutions. The technology, I think, is there. I think this would also be an area of interest.
Thank you. So I also love that focus on nature-based solutions. So in my work, I've had the opportunity to participate in the consultations for the NDCs of both the Philippines and the Singapore. And one thing that really I took away from that is how stark the difference is on the focus on nature-based solutions. And that's completely understandable for Singapore, right? It's very limited. But for countries like the Philippines, we have a lot of nature, it's almost automatic for us to focus on nature-based solutions, specifically because it's a win-win solution. It's much less risky. And the benefits are huge. So I used to work for coastal fisheries, where we focus on livelihood primarily, and also on the conservation of the coastal ecosystem. But towards the end, we discovered that the co-benefits, the mitigation co-benefits for blue carbon, are also massive. And I think that impact that those projects bring is so much more than what we can have from one-off renewable energy projects, because it goes so deep into the community, it goes so deep into their livelihoods. The trust is there, the community is there, and there's behavioral change. So that goes also into the question on climate finance. So what can the GCC learn from Southeast Asia? I think we have so much experience on programmatic, systematic projects that focus on co-benefits. I think the beauty of like South-South collaboration and the benefit of carbon markets is that we can sort of bank on each other's um, um, what we have and what other people don't have. So some countries are not able to, for example, like expand so much on solar, for example. But there's so much rich knowledge, for example, on Red Plus with Vietnam and with Indonesia and other countries that we can learn from, that we can use, that we can fund for to benefit other countries also. So. I think there's so much room for collaboration between between South developing countries, banking on what they're rich on and what they're strong with, to get the most benefit out of it, for sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all four of our panelists. I'm very happy with the conversation we had today, and it really gave us a lot to think of for the future of our work. Thank you for being here as well, and let's end it. Thank you.